Philip began to speak, and starting with the scripture, he proclaimed to him the good news about Jesus. Have you ever been in the wilderness? In the wilderness, we are often alone, wondering and wandering, trying to find our way. The wilderness, either literal or figurative, is a place where demons and fears can get the best of us. Temptations abound in the wilderness. Immediately following his baptism, Jesus is led into the wilderness where he is tempted by the devil and has a crucible experience. For the wilderness is also a place of transformation. Most of us will not make serious changes in our lives when everything is coming up sunshine and roses. No, it's when we're in the wilderness where God finds us, reaches out to us, and transforms us. In our reading this morning from the book of Acts, we find Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch both in the wilderness. And like Jesus, Philip is there because an angel has commanded him to go. Unexpectedly, he comes upon a person in need of guidance, a person who is seeking, searching, longing for more. And like we might feel, Philip just isn't quite sure what he's supposed to do. So he listens. He listens, and the Spirit says to him, "Go over to the chariot and join it." It's like the Spirit saying to us, "Go get in the car with that guy. Sit next to him." And Philip does it. So he goes and he asks the man who happens to be reading the scriptures a simple question. "Do you understand what you're reading?" And the man responds, "How can I, unless somebody guides me?" Then Philip begins to speak, and he proclaims to him the good news about Jesus. Shortly afterwards, the Ethiopian eunuch asked to be baptized. Now that's pretty sudden, and it doesn't normally happen that way, but it can happen pretty quickly. I can't help but wonder how many in Palm Beach County right now are longing, yearning for someone to guide them, reach out to them, and yes, to share the good news. But where do we start? How do we go about doing this? That's the question. Well, let me suggest this. Look around you this morning. Go ahead, just look around you. Look at the people around you. You can do it. Don't look at me. Good. We have people here today who have already found their way to Bethesda, who may be first-time visitors, our guests this morning. And to all of you, I say a hearty welcome. We also have many people here who may have been here for years, but perhaps you haven't met them. The place we can start to reach out in hospitality to our neighbor is right here, to the people around us. Hospitality is central to who we are as Christian people, and it is vastly different than extending hospitality to somebody in any other setting. Why? Because when we participate in Christian hospitality, we are joining a tradition as old as Abraham, a tradition embraced by Jesus and his followers, a tradition that enabled Christianity to spread beyond the borders of Palestine. In first century Judaism, Abraham is heralded as the supreme practitioner of hospitality. You may be familiar with the story when he and Sarah are sitting under the oaks of Mamre, and suddenly 3 strangers walk up. And Abraham says, "Well, why don't you join us for dinner?" And they offer them a meal of calf meat and milk and curd. And while they're eating, one gives them the seemingly impossible news that Sarah is going to bear a son. Sarah is 92. So she laughs. But it is true. It's a true prophecy. A few years prior to Jesus' ministry, a large monument was erected by Herod the Great on the supposed site of this meeting, not only commemorating the event, but highlighting its central place in the Jewish faith. Why was it so central? Because first century Jews believed that the way they welcomed the stranger was the same way God was going to welcome them at the great end-time banquet. If they were hospitable and welcoming, God would receive them in kind. Likewise, if they did not receive the stranger warmly, they would be received in the same way. I don't know about you, but when I first heard that, I really had to stop and think for a minute about what I'd been doing during coffee hours. Is God going to receive me in the same way I have always received the strangers among us? At the great coffee hour in the sky, will we be sitting on the side and feeling left out and alone? Think about it. I mean, we've just gotten through the pearly gates and we're all ready for a big welcome and nobody speaks to us. Will they make room for us, or will they just act like we're not there? Hospitality to the stranger was not only central to first century Jewish and Christian belief, but as I said, both religions are dependent on it, because this is how the people were able to teach and spread the word. This is how Jesus and Paul planted the seeds of the Christian church. Without strangers welcoming them into their homes, the gospel message would never have gotten beyond Palestine. Without hospitality, there may never have been one holy Catholic and Apostolic church. As we discuss reaching out and welcoming the stranger here at Bethesda, we must begin with one central question. Who is the stranger? As we enlarge the site of our tent, as the prophet Isaiah tells us to do, who are we going to welcome in? Will we sometimes keep the tent flaps down, tightly secured, while at other times we've got the flaps rolled back, the music playing, and the red carpet out? One of my favorite stories about keeping the tent flaps rolled back is from an old movie called Sister Act. How many of you have seen Sister Act back in the day? Okay, it's a good movie. If you've seen it, you might remember this scene. Whoopi Goldberg plays the role of a nightclub singer named Dolores who witnesses a murder in Reno, Nevada. As a result, her life is in great jeopardy. So they say, well, where can we hide Dolores so that nobody's going to find her? Well, they think a convent is a good place. So they take her to St. Catherine's Convent in San Francisco, and she's directed to the Mother Superior's study. The Mother Superior agrees to accept Whoopi until she opens the door and sees her. And there she sits in a gold lame coat, a purple sequined outfit, and a profusion of jewelry. The Mother Superior gasps and shuts the door. The Monsignor's standing right next to her, and he says, "Now remember, you have taken a vow of hospitality to all in need." And she looks at him with a straight face and she says, "I lied." How often do we, upon seeing some of the strangers God sends our way, if we're really being honest, say somewhere deep in our heart, "I lied. I lied when I took my baptismal vows and promised to seek and serve Christ in all persons and to respect the dignity of every human being." How many of us can say that in reality, yeah, there are times when we've got our tent flaps rolled down and tightly secured. Yet the very first distinction of Christian hospitality is precisely that we welcome people who may be unwelcome in other settings. It was a hallmark of Jesus' ministry to welcome those who were unacceptable in his day. He regularly dined with tax collectors and prostitutes. He healed lepers and women who were ritually unclean. Time and time again, he broke with the custom of his day to reach out to the outcast, the marginalized, the poor, the rejected ones that nobody else would welcome. When we make the decision to welcome all strangers. We become a link in the chain of hospitality that reaches all the way back to Abraham, through Jesus and his followers, through countless Christians throughout the ages. And when we make the decision to extend hospitality to someone in the name of Christ, and I don't mean that we say, I welcome you in the name of Christ, it's that we know we're doing it because we're Christians. When we extend hospitality in that spirit, Jesus is present. Remember when Jesus said, when 2 or 3 are gathered together, I am in the midst of them? He is. He is. When we have that consciousness that we are reaching out in his name, he becomes part of that conversation because we are reaching out to the Christ that is within that person. And this is the second distinction of Christian hospitality, and one that touches our hearts as lay and ordained ministers today. When we welcome someone in the Spirit of Christ, we're not just welcoming that person. We are welcoming the Christ within them. This is lyrically portrayed in an old Celtic rune or poem that is one of my favorites. And a rune is an ancient word for poem. So let me share this with you. It's called the Rune of Hospitality. I saw a stranger yestereen. I put food in the eating place, drink in the drinking place, music in the listening place. And in the blessed name of the Triune, he blessed myself, my house, my cattle, and my dear ones. And the lark said in her song, often, often, often goes the Christ in the stranger's guise. Often, often, often goes the Christ in the stranger's guise. With great prescience, James said just this past week that Bethesda's current focus on the Celtic experience and our focus on evangelism will overlap. And they do, in profound ways. One of the tenets of Celtic spirituality is that when we welcome the stranger, it is Christ whom we are welcoming. When we reach out to the stranger, we are reaching out to none other than Christ himself. So what does Philip do in our reading this morning? More than anything, he listens. He listens to God's leading. He prays. He goes where the Spirit tells him to go and reaches out into the name of Christ to the person that the Spirit has put in his path. And that's what happens. When we're aware of this, all of a sudden we realize that all along God's been sending us these people, and we just didn't realize it. And that is just the most marvelous discovery. It's wonderful. So I'll leave you with a question. Who has God put in your path this morning? Will you reach out to them?